The first time I saw her, she was standing inside a steel containment cage no larger than a cargo locker, her wrists bound in restraint bands designed for species far more dangerous than her trembling body suggested. The cargo bay of Port Helion smelled of engine coolant, burned wiring, and recycled air, normal for a station where law arrived late and mercy usually cost extra. I had only stopped there to replace a damaged coolant valve before continuing toward the mining colonies. That was the plan. Then I heard the auctioneer laugh. Rare Eastern Sector specimen. Quiet. Obedient. Healthy enough to work. The words made half the bay ignore him. The other half moved closer. Because on stations like Port Helion, anything described as rare usually meant profit. And profit drew people faster than ethics. I stepped around a cargo stack and saw the cage. Inside sat a young alien female, perhaps 19 or 20 by human appearance, though species age was impossible to judge. Her skin carried a pale silver tone that reflected overhead cargo lights. Dark markings ran faintly along her neck and wrists like living ink, and her long white hair had been tied badly to keep it out of her face. She was not looking at the crowd. She was looking only at the floor, like someone who had already learned that eye contact invited attention. The restraint collar around her throat pulsed faintly every few seconds. Control collar. Illegal in half the civilized systems. Common in the outer rim. I should have kept walking. Instead, I stayed long enough to hear the seller mention labor contracts. That was usually a lie. The collar, the restraints, the fear, those belonged to trafficking routes disguised as debt transfer. The auctioneer slapped the cage bars. She doesn't fight. Barely speaks standard. The girl flinched hard enough that several buyers laughed. Something in me made the decision before logic did. How much? The auctioneer turned. He looked disappointed when he saw me. Grease-stained work jacket, engineer's gloves, no obvious wealth. 20 credits. Too cheap. That meant they thought she was trouble. Or damaged. Or both. I paid anyway, and immediately regretted that everyone nearby now assumed I had purchased a living being for reasons they probably found normal. The cage opened. The girl did not move. A guard shoved her forward. She stumbled, nearly fell, then froze beside me, waiting. Not asking anything. Not speaking. Only waiting for the first command, or the first cruelty. That was when I understood how badly fear had already trained her. My ship, the Drift Sparrow, was barely large enough for long travel. One cockpit, one engine bay, 2 bunks, and a galley held together by repairs more creative than official. The moment the hatch closed behind us, she moved to the farthest corner near the storage wall and stood there rigidly. Still silent. Still watching everything except me. I set my tool bag down slowly. You can sit if you want. No response. The translator caller likely understood standard, but she either did not trust it or expected hidden meaning. I crouched carefully and examined the restraint bands. Cheap outer rim lock design. Easy to open. The moment I touched one, she jerked backward and raised both hands instinctively as if preparing for impact. Not defense. Protection. She expected to be hit. That landed harder than I expected. I'm removing them, I said quietly. It took 3 seconds to unlock both wrists. Red marks circled her skin beneath the bands. When the collar came off, she inhaled sharply, like someone tasting air properly for the first time in days. Then she backed away again, still waiting, still suspicious. Kitchen's there, I said, pointing. Water, too. I'm in the engine bay. No dramatic speech. No promises. Just distance. Because frightened people trust less when given too much kindness too quickly. I learned that years ago in refugee corridors after the Mars corridor conflicts. By the time I finished engine diagnostics an hour later, The water container was half empty.
Good.
At least survival instinct remained stronger than fear. Night on a cargo ship is mostly machine sound. Cooling vents, reactor hum, metal settling under slow travel. I returned from the engine bay carrying a repair blanket I used during long maintenance shifts. The main cabin lights were dimmed. She had not touched the food tray I left. Instead, she sat curled near the far wall, knees drawn close, eyes open in darkness. Watching me, watching every movement. I set the blanket down near her, not on her. Temperature drops after midnight. Ship insulation isn't perfect. Then I moved toward my bunk. After 2 steps, I heard movement. Very slight. I turned. She had picked up the blanket, but held it like she expected hidden pain inside the fabric. No one had probably given her anything lately without demanding something first.
You can keep it, I said.
For the first time, she spoke. One careful sentence in broken standard. Why? A single word, but heavy with suspicion. Because to someone taught cruelty, kindness always looks like a trap. I leaned against the doorway. Because you're cold. She stared like the answer itself made no sense, then lowered her eyes slowly. That night, I heard almost no movement from her corner. But when I woke before dawn, the blanket was wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her name came the next morning. Not freely. Accidentally. I was heating nutrient packs when a turbulence jolt shook the ship, and she grabbed the nearest surface, whispering something sharp in her own language. Was that your name? She hesitated. Then, Nere. John, I said. She nodded once, still uncertain whether names here meant danger. Over the next 2 days, language came slowly, not because she lacked intelligence, because every answer first passed through fear. I learned she came from a colony world near disputed trade borders. A raider attack destroyed transport routes. Survivors were sold through labor chains. Families separated early. She stopped speaking whenever the subject reached that point. So I stopped asking. Instead, I taught ship basics. Which switch opened storage. How water rationing worked. Why the engine hissed before jump correction. By the 3rd day, she finally ate while I remained in the same room. A small victory. By the 4th, she slept without sitting against the wall. But trust remained fragile. One loud sound still made her freeze. One unexpected movement still made her step back. Trauma teaches the body long after logic changes. Trouble arrived near Ravelin Corridor. A patrol signal intercepted my ship. Not official military. Station enforcement from Port Helion. 3 ships. Too late to outrun. A voice came through comms. Unregistered transfer requires inspection.
Lie.
They wanted property returned or sold again. Nere heard enough standard to understand danger instantly. I saw it in the way all trust vanished from her face at once. She thought I would hand her back. Maybe she believed that had always been the destination. Stay in the engine compartment, I told her. No, please. First, full fear in her voice. That word hit harder than shouting. I locked the interior hatch manually and opened outer comms. 2 armed officers boarded within minutes. One recognized me from the auction. Documentation for transferred asset. She isn't cargo. He smiled the way bad people smile when law becomes optional. Then she's unlicensed transport. Behind him, the 2nd officer looked already prepared to search compartments. I handed over forged maintenance paperwork while deliberately engaging him in argument about reactor permits. Enough distraction for Nere to remain hidden. But then the 2nd officer moved toward the engine hatch. And, before I thought it through, I stepped directly in his path. That escalated instantly. Weapons rose. 1 second stretched long enough for stupid choices. Fortunately, station officers dislike gunfire near unstable engines. I pointed at the overheating conduit behind them and shouted, "Touch that hatch and this whole ship vents plasma." It was partly true, mostly exaggerated, but fear works when technical details sound expensive. They left angry, threatening future inspection fines. When the hatch sealed again, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes. Then, opened the engine compartment. Nere stood pressed against the wall, shaking. "You didn't sell me."
No.
"You argued with armed men. They were rude." That earned something new. Not laughter, but the beginning of disbelief turning into trust. We reached Haven Reach 2 days later. It was not much to look at: metal domes, supply towers, recycled air systems, but it had legal protection, medical support, and species resettlement programs that asked fewer, harmful questions than most governments. I had arranged placement before arrival through an old contact. Dr. Mira Sun met us at docking. The moment she saw Nerea's collar marks, her face hardened in that quiet professional way doctors use when anger must wait. "We'll register her safely," Mira said. Nere immediately looked at me, not at the doctor.
At me.
As if waiting to learn whether this was another handover. "You're staying here?" she asked quietly. "For now," I said. "Safer than cargo routes." Her fingers tightened around the blanket she still carried. The same blanket from the first night. That detail nearly broke me more than anything dramatic had, because among everything she could have kept, she chose the first object not linked to fear. Medical scans confirmed dehydration, stress trauma, and minor nerve damage from restraint bands, but nothing permanent. Within a week, she began language classes. Within 2 weeks, she started helping in greenhouse sectors because she preferred living systems to enclosed rooms. I repaired atmospheric pumps nearby, longer than necessary, mostly because leaving immediately felt wrong. One evening, while sunset light reflected off dome glass, she approached carrying folded cloth. The blanket, washed, carefully repaired where old stitching had frayed. "I thought this was yours," she said. "It was." She hesitated. "Why give it if you needed it?" "Because that first night you looked like someone who expected the universe to hurt you if warmth arrived." But I said only, "I had another." She nodded slowly, then surprised me by not handing it back. Instead, she held it tighter. "May I keep this one?" "Of course." Another pause. Then, "When you placed it beside me, I thought pain would follow." The honesty came softly. No drama, just truth. And when it didn't, I did not understand. I looked toward the settlement lights, turning on across the dome. Sometimes people don't deserve what they've been taught to expect. She stood beside me quietly. Not frightened now. Not uncertain. Just present. 3 months later, when my ship prepared to leave again, half the settlement gathered because news travels fast when small places become families. Nere arrived last, wearing proper settlement clothes now, healthier, stronger, the silver in her skin brighter under daylight, still carrying the same blanket folded over one arm. "I will not ask you to stay," she said. "Good. Because my engine complains when ignored." That finally made her laugh openly. Then she stepped forward and hugged me before I could invent a response. A quick, fierce gesture, unexpected enough that my hands stayed awkwardly in the air for half a second before returning it. When she stepped back, her eyes were wet but steady. "You bought me for 20 credits, she said. "I bought a problem. You gave me the first safe night after many unsafe ones." No answer felt adequate, so I nodded. As the drift sparrow lifted from the dock, I looked down through the side glass. She stood below with the blanket around her shoulders, despite the warmth. And I understood something simple. The moment that changed everything had not been buying freedom, not removing restraints, not hiding her from station officers.